All right. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning. My name is Yabi Demisi, and I serve as the Assistant Director of Learning Programs here within the Emory Alumni Association. Before we get started, just like the usual, few housekeeping announcements. As you guys just saw, this webinar is being recorded for those who can't make it today. And if you have any questions throughout the session for Hallie, please, you can either hold on to it until the Q&A portion, or feel free to just go ahead and put it in the chat, and then she'll be sure to answer it once she finishes her presentation. So Hallie has been a certified career coach, speaker, author, and national career expert since 2002. Her company, Create Your Career Path, is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, and she's regularly featured in the media, Forbes, CNN, Money Magazine, for example, and has an undergraduate and graduate degrees from Vanderbilt University and the University of Illinois. With over 2,000 success stories, her team of coaches and resume writers help professionals to find jobs that make them want to jump out of bed in the morning to go to work. And their website is createyourpath.com. So I'll be sure to also send all of that information after as well. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Hallie.
Thanks, Yabi. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. As I was sharing earlier on before we got started, this is my favorite topic to discuss, obviously, because I'm a coach, and so I love the skills and tools that we leverage with our clients. And what happens so often is when we're coaching our clients, which is part of why we're here today, or a big part of it, they will tell us, oh, I want to use these skills with my employees or with my coworkers, etc. And we always want people to do that, because coaching skills for managers, whether you're a new manager or a seasoned manager, or whatever your situation is, the advice that we're going to give you today is going to be relevant for your situation. These coaching skills can be incredibly helpful for so many different reasons. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today. So as Yabi said, I'm a certified career coach. I've been coaching and training for a really long time, since 2002. I'm actually turning 50 tomorrow, so I have a big birthday coming up. And the advice that we are going to give you today is advice that we give to all of our clients every day. And help teach them how to be better leaders within their organization, but also, within their lives as well, but managing employees that much more effectively. And I feel like, given everything that has gone on with the job market and the economy and, post-COVID and everything else, and how people have changed in terms of their priorities and what they want out of work these days, that these coaching skills are even that much more important. We can't stay in the old school kind of dynamic that we used to be kind of in the past. So here's our agenda for today, and we're actually going to launch our first poll like right out of the box, because we'd love to hear kind of the demographic, if you will, or interest, why you're here today. So as you're filling out the poll, we're going to talk about like what we mean by coaching and how coaching in its truest form is defined, and talk also about why coaching skills we feel are so incredibly important. The second thing we're going to do is give you 5 critical coaching skills that we feel are like pretty easy for anyone to adopt and implement, and you'll see pretty dramatic results as a result of doing this. So we'll talk about those 5, and then we will have time for Q&A at the end. As Yabi mentioned, you can go ahead. Oh, and people are saying happy birthday. That is so kind. Thank you. I appreciate that. You can go ahead and put your questions anytime you would like to in the chat feature, and we will get to those at the end. And then also, if anyone would like a copy of the slides, Yabi will put this in the follow-up email, but you could email us at admin@createyourcareerpath.com, and we will send you a link to get those downloaded. So let's take a look at what we've got for our poll. We've got 9% that are saying new leader. 45% are saying taking on more senior leadership roles. That's fantastic. Managing difficult employees and peer relationships, 36%. Thank you all for sharing this, because I want you to know that we have a whole webinar that is dedicated to that topic, and a lot of that content is built around what we're going to be talking about today. So the coaching skills, excuse me, that we will discuss today will help you with these scenarios and situations. And if you need a little bit more specific advice about those particular situations, we offer a free strategy session for you, but also feel free to put those in the Q&A, and we'll start to talk about those kind of as we go today. And then 9% are saying other. So thank you for completing that poll. That's awesome. All of these coaching skills are going to help you with a lot of different situations, including things like managing change, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so here's the deal. Why is coaching, or why are coaching skills important? And also talking about how we define coaching. So first thing on this next slide is a lot of stuff has happened in the past several years, as we know. Some of us are now back to working fully in person, but maybe they're noticing their work relationships have changed. Maybe they've suffered a little bit. Some people I know at the very beginning, when we started to go back into the office, were like, how do I make small talk again? So there's just a lot of different things that have gone on. And as a result, over the past few years, people have felt less connected to their peers, their employees, and their organizations. It's getting better as we have gone back to the office. But what we're finding is that there's less, and there has been less of that water cooler talk. And so we're kind of like needing to get back into the groove with that. But two things that I want to mention at the bottom of this slide here are the last two bullet points. Is now what we are finding from an employee perspective, as well as from an employer perspective or a manager perspective, is that employees are wanting a lot more engagement with their organization, and they want to have more meaning out of their work. They want to have a greater sense of fulfillment. And as managers, sometimes it's like, okay, how do we deal with that, and how do we handle it and manage, employees who are wanting that? And a lot of times too, they're wanting greater flexibility with their schedule and in other ways as well. And the difficult part, I think, for employers is they don't always know how to handle this. And we have to kind of adjust to this, because this is a trend across the board where managers need to kind of get up with the times, so to speak, and be better about dealing with these different situations and the needs of employees, because it's not going to go away. Okay. And also the second, the very last bullet point here too, is that we've heard from some managers too, especially if they're dealing with employees who are remote. Some may be remote and some may be not. And how do I navigate that? And some employees may be in a hybrid model. It's harder to know in some cases how to lead effectively remotely or in that hybrid model, and kind of deal with all of that. And so the coaching skills that we're talking with you about today will help you with all of these different scenarios, because when we talk about how we define coaching and what we mean for our purposes today, what coaching means is it's very much about asking the right questions and getting into deeper, more constructive, effective conversations with people by getting them to come up with their own answers in some cases. So if you look at this next slide, coaching in its truest form is supposed to be about helping someone learn how to do things more effectively, or you're learning more about them and what's important to them and what their strengths and skills are, et cetera, in order to improve and enhance their performance, achieve their goals, be more fulfilled, all this good stuff. And if you look at the right-hand side of the slide here, coaching is not supposed to be about telling people what to do, giving them instructions all the time. Instead, it's leaning a little bit more sometimes into helping them figure something out on their own, showing someone kind of the beginning of the path and letting them run down the rest of the path by themselves, and they learn more that way. It's also about giving constructive and good feedback. And in some cases, it might be tough feedback. And we'll talk about that today as we go, explaining something in the right way or encouraging them. So bottom line, coaching is not supposed to be about telling someone what to do. Now, we know as managers, and we'll take a look at this next slide, we have to tell people what to do. Like, that's part of what we're there for and part of our role. And we get that. So there are some times where, because of time constraints or whatever the situation is, that you do need to just say, this is what I need you to do and how you need to do it. But we want to train managers to lean more so when they can into these coaching skills as much as possible. And by the way, These coaching skills do not have to take a lot of time. So that's the other good news is we know everyone's busy. We don't want you to feel like, oh, how am I going to do this? Is this going to take a lot of time on my part when I just need to get people to get things done? Okay. So it will not take that much time. It's a mindset and a different way of kind of doing things a little bit. So what coaching is on the left-hand side of this next slide. It's a way to provide guidance to professionals to, again, be a partner in their learning and their progression and everything else, and not just always saying this is what needs to be done. The cool thing about leveraging these coaching skills is it can empower them to find their own answers. And when people find their own answers, they're going to remember that learning lesson more. They're going to be able to find new or different ways of doing things that really play to their strengths and maybe better in some ways. So it's really good because it's like this two heads are better than one kind of concept. Coaching is not therapy. But as we talk about today, dealing with people who are difficult or there's conflict or whatever, feelings are going to come up and they may need to be addressed. And as coaches, again, or being coach like as a manager, we're not the person's therapist, but we are going to have to deal with feelings and emotions in some way, shape, or form. And we'll show you how to start doing that. And again, as we've already said, it's not about just telling people what to do all the time. It's learning to get a better sense in some ways of when is it a good time to just tell someone this is what you need done versus ask them what their perspective is or how they think it should be performed so that you can learn a little bit more about what their perspective is if they've got a different or better way of doing things. So asking the right questions is one of the critical coaching skills we're going to talk about today. So if you look at this next slide, our 5 critical coaching skills are listed here. And this is what we're going to get into now. Designing your relationships more effectively, better listening, powerful questions, which is kind of a coaching term, how to recognize other people's strengths and play to them more, and developing your own kind of unique leadership strengths and knowing where your strengths and maybe your challenges are and how to kind of work around those and build the right team as well too. So let's talk about our first critical coaching skill at the beginning here. And we'll talk about a couple of things. And I would love if we could go ahead and launch the second poll so people can kind of fill that out and but be listening at the same time as well. So the deal with designing your relationships, it's kind of broad strokes here, and some of the ideas are listed on these next couple of slides here. Okay, so what we're talking about when we're discussing designing your relationships more effectively, these can be multiple different things. It's how you can structure your relationships, your current relationships with your employees more effectively. Even if you've had that relationship for a long time, it's always okay to kind of take a step back for a second and say, hey, I'd like to talk today about how we can work together even more effectively. I've got some new ideas that I'd like to implement and get your input on. So these can be for new relationships, but they can also be for existing relationships. This is also about structuring conversations more effectively and meetings more effectively so that you're thinking about kind of the context of the meeting or conversation in the relationship. And we're not just always focused on the agenda and what we need to get done then, but it's like, what else do we want to get accomplished during the course of this conversation? And we'll talk about these next things after we look at the poll results here. So one of the things that we want to discuss today as part of designing your relationships is, as managers, as much as possible, what we assert is we want managers to create like what we would call a safe space, if you will, like a positive, productive, safe space for people to have constructive and deep conversations as needed so that people aren't feeling like they can't talk with you, that they're intimidated, that feedback is not allowed or whatever it is, and that they just can't speak up. So the reason why we're asking about what makes you willing to be more open with someone is within reason, because again, it's a professional relationship and this is not therapy. What makes you be willing to be open with someone? As managers, we want to develop some of these things so that our employees can feel comfortable speaking up, giving ideas, asking questions, that type of thing, so that we can get as much as possible out of these working professional relationships. And the biggest one from this poll, and thank you all for participating in this, is trust. All of these, that 78% people answered that, and all of these coaching skills are designed to help develop greater trust, greater empathy, and invite people to be more open with you. So all of these three, but what we're noticing here with this next poll, which I think is really interesting and makes perfect sense, is that trust is a really big one. And trust can be developed in a lot of different ways. And all of these skills that we're teaching you today, as well as some of the other tools we'll give you, will help you to develop greater trust over time with your employees. Keep in mind, as you start to implement these tools, trust is not an overnight thing. It's something that does need to be built over time. What is that saying where it can be broken really easily, but it takes time to have it built up? So a couple of things that we want to talk about on this first slide here, when you're thinking about designing or redesigning or setting a good stage for your current working relationships a little bit more, when you're thinking about getting set up or ready for and leading a particular meeting, or even having a conversation, even if it's a difficult one, one-on-one with someone you're having a challenge with, these are some of the things that you could consider implementing to help you design that conversation or set the stage for it a little bit better. One of the ideas is whether that conversation, meeting, etc., needs to be confidential. A lot of times, if you let someone know that this conversation is going to be confidential and you honor that, if it's needed for that particular conversation or meeting, you want to bring that up in advance, not after the fact. A second thing that you can do to help design or redesign your relationship a little bit more, especially, for example, if there's some conflict going on, maybe you need to have a discussion with that person a little bit more about what your style is as a leader and what your strengths are and desires as a leader. And I give this example that I'm just about to mention because it can help with this. So we had a client once who was the type of person who was very calm as a cucumber, cool as a cucumber, I guess it is, under pressure in her previous job. And she realized as she was moving into a new position as a manager at a different organization that some people may have felt like she didn't really care about deadlines as much and misinterpreted her personality type and strengths as a leader as something else. So the more you can educate the people that work for you as a manager about who you are, what your values are, what your priorities are, the better off they're going to be, because then you can start to understand if they have different values or priorities, why there might be a rub, or they aren't making assumptions about you and what's important to you and how you operate and work. The more you can teach them about how you work, the more they can try to kind of manage up to that, and you guys can find a way to meet in the middle. The third thing that you can do in touchy situations, but even outside of that, is be willing to be vulnerable or open with them as appropriate. Okay. We had someone we were coaching. It was actually an MBA student out in Idaho. He was the CEO of his organization and had been for years. And he realized that early on, he was pretty intimidating to people and needed to change the culture of his organization. One of the things he started to do was be a little bit more vulnerable and open with his employees about when he first started out in his career, some of the mistakes he made, some of the fears that he had had. This wasn't undermining him as a leader, but he was being more vulnerable and open to let them know, hey, I wasn't always this way, always a CEO. And he noticed the culture of his organization and of his team starting to change. They were more willing to be vulnerable and open with him and speak about things, which was great. One of the third things you can consider doing, actually, it's the fourth thing, sorry, is also when you're setting up or getting ready for a conversation or a meeting, you've got the agenda, the bullet points you want to talk about, establish what we might call kind of soft goals for the conversation or the meeting as well. This is not just what we need to accomplish in this meeting with our team or our group, but I also want to build greater camaraderie with my group here, and think about how you might be able to do that too. And then finally, another thing you can do to start to redesign your relationships a little bit more, and again, this depends on the person and what you think will work with their style and personality and their needs, start to check in with people about their feelings. Are they fulfilled in their job? Do they feel like they are, connected to the values and the mission of the organization and of your group? Don't just check in with people about tasks all the time, but check in with them about how they're feeling and if they're playing to their strengths, because that's going to invite this more open, engaging conversation. And you can start talking with them as well about, are they engaged in their work? And do they feel aligned with things, or are there changes that need to be made? We talked a second ago about creating a safe space. Some of the things, actually, I would say all of the tools that we're talking about today related to coaching will help you create this safe space, whether it's a touchy situation or not, but especially if it is a conflict ridden situation, or if you're dealing with a difficult coworker or employee or whatever it is. Couple of things that you want to do to create that safe space is when you're having a meeting with them at the very beginning, for example, you want to kind of gut check the energy. Like when they're coming into the room, how do they seem to be coming across? Do you need to help get their defenses down? Do you need to let them vent for a moment if they seem kind of wound up? You want to pay attention not just to, okay, this is the language I want to use and the conversation I want to have, but I want to pay attention to how this person is feeling. Because, for example, if you're trying to shove some feedback down their throat, so to speak, and they don't seem like they're in a place to do that, or this isn't a good time for them to do that, you need to pay attention to it, because they may not be in a good space to be even hearing you at all. And you need to check in on that and say, should we have this conversation at a later time? Two other things on this slide that we feel are incredibly important is to let them know that you would like to talk to them about something touchy in advance if you think that would be a good thing to do, because let's say they're more introverted and they may need to process that a little bit, or tell them or let them know that you would like to do that during the course of your conversation or at the beginning of your meeting, and ask their permission. This is the key point with this one. Ask them if that is okay with them, because especially if you need to give someone difficult or touchy negative feedback, instead of just launching into it, say, you know what, Susan, I need to talk with you about something that is a little bit touchy for me to bring up, and it may be a little bit of a difficult conversation for us to have, but I feel like it's really important for us to do so in order to deal with some of the possible issues that may be going on for us, so we can get past it and work together more effectively. Is that okay with you? Is this an okay time to do that? Asking permission gets their buy-in. It drops their defenses. A lot of good things that happen with that. And the likelihood is that they're going to say yes. If they say no, you can say, when is a better time to have this conversation? Because we're not letting them out of it, but you may need to give them time to process it, or have part of the conversation today and part of the conversation tomorrow. Asking permission, really good and big. And then the third thing to think about on the slide here on the far right is to give people a chance, especially if it is a touchy situation and conflict ridden, or if the other person is upset. This is where we talked a moment ago about letting them vent for a moment. They may need to get something off their chest. Now, they need to behave professionally, and this is not an opportunity for them to lay into you, even though they might. As leaders, we want to kind of keep it together as much as possible. At the very beginning of your conversation with them, it's a good idea to ask them some questions versus, again, just launching into what's going on. Then, and gather their opinion and how they're feeling and what they're thinking about the situation. Again, don't make assumptions, don't just launch into things, but ask their opinion first. Ask them if there's anything they feel like they need to discuss, then discuss and share your opinion. That's going to help build trust a little bit more when you've given them that space and time, and it's a safe space to kind of vent a little bit and ask their opinion. Okay. Let's talk next about our second critical coaching skill. Remember, there's 5. And this is 3 levels of listening. Now, I know you all have probably heard a lot about this before. Yes, I've heard about active listening ad nauseum. Okay, we get it. The 3 levels of listening and coaching, we wanted to just kind of add one more layer here in how we present it to our clients. So there's 3 levels of listening. Number 1 is level 1, internal listening, if you will, where we're listening to our own inner voice. That sounds really hard. I'm hungry. I want this meeting to be over. I'm really anxious about this. Whatever's going on, we have to be in this level sometimes just to take care of our own needs. But we want to be careful about being in level 1 too much when we're talking with someone else. How many times have we been guilty of paying attention or thinking about the next thing that we want to say versus really listening to the other person? I do this all the time. I try not to, but it's just kind of human nature. So we need level 1 listening, but leaders need to be at level 2 and level 3 as much as we possibly can. especially when we're having a conversation or we're in a group meeting with people. This is where focus listening is level 2, focus on the other person, and not just listening to the words that they're saying though, but listening to or paying attention to their nonverbals and the nuances in their conversation and their tone. Are they saying yes to something or a project because they feel like they have to because you're the boss, but you really feel like with their nonverbal behavior or whatever it is, they are actually saying no, and you need to call that out and not just step over it because this is a really important project and you need to make sure that they are really on board. So level 2 listening is focus listening, words, but also nonverbals. Level 3 is global listening, and we talked about this a little bit at the very beginning, where we're gut checking the energy level and what's going on with the other person. So level 3 global listening on the left-hand side is it's the energy between the two of you or within the group, how it's changing. Is there a shift in attitude? What's the mood or the tone of the conversation? And not just continuing with that tone if it's going in a bad direction, but pulling yourself back and saying, okay, hold on here. Maybe we need to shift how we approach this. Should we hit pause on this conversation? Because I feel like we're both kind of getting worked up and maybe defensive. Would it be okay with you if we pause on it, think about things overnight and come back to it tomorrow? You need to pay attention to the energy in the room, their energy, and the energy between the two of you. And the way to do this is on the right-hand side here. Quiet yourself down a little bit more. Talk less, listen more, ask better questions. Calm yourself down. Do some deep breathing. Slow down your conversation. Like literally talk a little bit slower, because that will help you be more deliberate in what you're saying and making sure that you're not stepping over something that your gut is telling you, okay, hold on, they're saying this, but I don't really feel like they're totally on board. And I need to kind of call that out a little bit, paying attention to those things. Slow them down a little bit if needed. In some cases, if you get their permission in advance, like at the beginning of the conversation, it may be okay to interrupt them and guide them and say, okay, hold on, Joe. Remember, we were wanting to focus on talking about how to approach this task for you. And now we're starting to talk about this other stuff. Can we get back to the topic of conversation? I just want to guide us back. Okay. And in some cases, ask a question rather than giving advice. That's what we talked about earlier. So let's do our third poll here. And based on what we've just told you, these 3 levels of listening, we'd love to hear how people feel about if you currently employ effective listening skills based on these 3 levels. And we get it. If you feel like, you're fantastic, that is awesome. You may just want to get a little bit better at doing this in certain touchy situations, because that's when it can be a little bit harder to do so. Or if you're saying, you know what, not as good as I would like to be, I'm going to, pick one of these to kind of focus on a little bit more, that would be great too. And so far, it looks like for our poll, most people are saying yes, 67% give or take, which is awesome. That's great. You may want to just fine tune the scenarios or situations where you employ them a little bit more. And about 30% are saying they do not. So this is something, just pick one of these. And remember, we don't have to be perfect listeners all the time, every single second. That's unrealistic. Some instances and situations require us to go right in, make things happen, and move on, and that's fine. But if you can just turn up the gas a little bit on this active and proactive listening, you're going to find huge benefits to it. Small changes with these things that we're talking about today with the coaching skills, we have actually found for people reap very big impactful results, if you will. So as we said, it should be relatively easy, so to speak. All right. So thanks for closing out and sharing that poll. We've got the majority of people that are saying good with listening, which is absolutely fantastic. Let's talk about our third coaching skill. And this is the idea of guiding, not advising people, which we've talked about all along. So powerful questions is kind of a concept, if you will, in coaching. And basically, if you look on the left-hand side here, powerful questions are questions that we ask people that are curious. They are open-ended. They're almost like childlike. They don't have judgment in them, and they don't make any assumptions. And it allows the listener, the employee, whoever it is that you're talking with, to kind of experiment with their own answers versus you just telling them what to do. And they are open-ended. The critical key here is in the middle. They do not allow for a yes or no answer. Okay. So the two things that I really like about powerful questions is the employee cannot say just yes or no. They invite or require or almost force, I hate to use that word, but further discussion. The other cool thing I like about powerful questions is that if you frame them the right way, they will assume or do assume a positive outcome, which is fantastic. So here are some examples on this slide here. And if you'll notice, how can we work together more effectively? You can't say yes or no to that, A. And B, it assumes that we can do this together. Okay. So the more you can, as appropriate, and in certain situations, when you want the employee to learn a little bit more, to figure things out on their own more, when you want to gather their perspective and how they're feeling about things, or if they're playing to their strengths, etc., powerful questions can be a really great way to do this. And you can do this in one-on-one meetings, but also in group settings as well, to gather ideas, brainstorming, feedback, etc., etc. Okay. You have to be careful with powerful questions that there's no judgment in them. Okay. And sometimes that can be hard because, especially as managers, we may feel like, okay, this person is being difficult and they're driving me nuts or whatever it is. As much as possible, you need to park your judgment at the door and just be really curious. And so curiosity as part of this idea of powerful questions is how you want to approach it. Basically, you want to get into your curious place, so to speak. You stay present with them in these three levels of listening, as we talked about, or levels 2 and 3. We have said earlier, and we know that it's appropriate to offer your opinion, and you get to make the decision at the end of the day, absolutely. But if you can, as a manager, just make a little bit more of an effort to understand their perspective, understand where they're coming from, even if you don't take their opinion or advice because it's not relevant, it's not going to work, or whatever it is, the fact that you have listened to them and were curious about it, and even said, look, let's try to move in that direction if we can, or let me sleep on this and we'll talk about it tomorrow, whatever, that will have an impact on that relationship that you have together and on that other person. Part of why we're talking about all of these coaching skills, and as a manager and a leader, being curious about people and about your relationship with them, I really like this model a lot, and I wanted to introduce this model from the Gallup organization that is what they call the 4 needs of followers. Followers is not my favorite word to use. We could call this employees, and this would include you, anyone who works for or is part of an organization. But one of the things that we want you to be thinking about as it relates to preparing for a conversation with someone you're having trouble with, or someone you need to inspire more, or if your team is just kind of lagging, these needs are things that everyone has individually as part of an organization. And using this model, you could start to identify what may be going wrong within your team, or what needs to be boosted or bolstered up a little bit more within that relationship or within your group. So let me just give you kind of a quick overview here of what the deal is. So does your team, or does this relationship, require a little bit more trust between the two of us? Because that's part of the breakdown and what the problem is, or this could be within your team. So you may, as the leader or manager, need to focus for the next couple of weeks or the next month on building trust a little bit more by being a little bit more transparent with people, asking them deeper questions, showing them respect for their work, and giving them a little bit more kudos, for example. So this can help you identify what may be going right or wrong within your team or your group, or one-on-one in a relationship. And it can give you the kind of the clue to, okay, what needs to be fixed or adjusted. In addition to trust, we all want a sense of stability from our organizations. Now, we know layoffs are happening and people are scared. What do you need to do as a leader to give your employees a little bit more sense of security? Maybe you can't promise that we're not going to have layoffs or whatever it is, but can you let them know and keep them a little bit more in the loop about what's going on within the organization, whatever you're able to share? Where can you provide them a little bit greater support, a little bit more talk time with you? Do you need to check in with them more often? Whatever it is that you may need to do to provide that stability, that could be something that can help your relationship with your employees as a manager. Everyone wants a sense of compassion. We don't have to be friends with people at work necessarily, right? We're going to have different types of professional organizations, of course, but you at least need to show people a sense of empathy, a sense of caring about their growth and development. This goes back to empowering them a little bit more and asking them questions and talking with them a little bit more, letting them vent, checking in with them on their weekend. And are they enjoying their job at all? And are they playing to their strengths? This is that sense of compassion. And then finally, we all want a sense of to have a sense of hope, faith and direction, and like faith in our organization and in the leaders of our organization. Do you need to be a little bit more inspiring, for example, as a manager, and provide a little bit more guidance to some of your employees who might need it? So, for example, if you're the type of manager who doesn't like to micromanage, which is usually a really good thing, do you need to make sure, though, that you're checking in with them a little bit more in some way, shape, or form? We had a client once who worked at a large healthcare consulting organization. She loved this model, and she took a look at it, and the next day she said to us, I know exactly what's going wrong and what's going right or well within my organization based on these 4 needs of followers. So it's a really good, very simple model that can help you do some deeper thinking about strengths and weaknesses within your organization and within your team and your department, and what you may need to be doing differently with specific employees as well. If you feel like you need greater advice with this, because we know this one is a little bit more in depth with people and your situation may be unique, we always like to offer a free strategy session. I would be happy to talk with you a little bit further to give you some additional advice to piggyback on today. And it's also a call to learn a little bit more about our coaching services as well. You can email us at admin@createyourcareerpath. And I guess the dog agrees. Sorry about that. Let me deal with that 1 second. Okay, I think he's going to chill. Our 4th coaching skill is a really important one. And we've kind of alluded to this already along the way. And this is recognizing, but also playing to other people's strengths, your employees' strengths, so that you're not, for example, just kind of tossing them into the deep end and saying, okay, do this project or whatever it is, which I'm sure you wouldn't do, but that you're really paying more attention to, does this person have the skills and strength and personality type for the things that I'm asking them to do? And also asking them, do they feel like they're playing to their strengths? Because, by the way, if employees don't feel like they're doing so and playing to their strengths on a regular basis, they're not going to be happy and fulfilled, much less effective, right? So we need to be careful, obviously, about asking people to do things that's not in their wheelhouse. This is also a model, the SIGN model from the Gallup organization, that is the owner of the Strengths Finder assessment. And this SIGN model is really great because we would recommend as managers that we pay close attention on a consistent basis, even at the beginning of each of our meetings with each of our employees one-on-one, to say, okay, what are this person's like top 5 strengths? And are we playing to them on a regular basis? And am I using this language with them to help empower them to adjust or play to their strengths a little bit more in their role? And the way that you can recognize other people's strengths, obviously there's lots of different assessments out there, but when this person is effective and you can tell they feel effective and they're successful, that's obvious sign of a strength. When they are actively looking forward to or volunteering for certain types of tasks or projects, and they seem to have an instinct for it, it's just really natural to them, that's another sign of their strength, and you need to pay attention to that. When you feel like they're growing as an employee, they seem to be in the zone, really focused and inquisitive and all of that, that's another sign of an employee's strength. Pay attention to that too. And in terms of needs, when you notice that they're really jazzed about something, a task that you've given them or a project, or even working with a specific client or customer, don't just step over that. Notice it and not just say, oh, I'm so glad this was, awesome for you and exciting. Ask them why it was and what were the strengths that they feel they exhibited or played to during the course of that project or working with that particular person. Because the more you can play to people's strengths, the more you're going to get out of them, for lack of a better way to say it, but the more excited they are going to be about their job, motivated, all this other stuff that bleeds into everything else too. So our final coaching skill is a little bit different from the other ones because it's taking some self-reflective time to yourself to think about what your unique leadership style is. A lot of times we will have clients ask us, for example, after they've taken the Strengths Finder assessment, well, what are the top 5 ideal strengths for a perfect leader? And that's a perfectly, reasonable question. And the answer is there is no one set of top 5. Everyone is different as a leader and has different strengths. The key is to understand what yours are and play to those strengths, but also kind of help plug the holes of where your weaknesses or challenges are by having other people around you who can help you with those things. So, some of the things that we want you to think about as they relate to your unique leadership style are obviously what are your strengths? And we've got a leadership wheel on the next slide. We'll show you to help you with that. We also want you to think about your soft skills, though, too, and say, okay, in addition to being really good at these 5 things, I'm also fantastic at, for example, being vulnerable, maybe, but I'm not as good at managing conflict. And I need to deal with that and be a little bit better at it. So don't just think about your tangible skills and strength, think about your soft skills too, and how that rolls into not just your leadership style, but the culture of the team that you are leading and developing. We also would like you to think about your values as a professional and your values as a leader, because without even knowing it, you are infusing those values into your team by the types of tasks that you assign to your team, by how you approach things, by the style of conversation that you have with them. The values are really important to know for yourself, but it's also really cool and would be great to know and understand a little bit more about the values of your employees, because that's where, again, you can tap into their motivation and their inspiration and help work with them on, okay, how can I be really engaged in my work? And what can I do to kind of adjust things if needed according to their values too? One of the things about values, by the way, is if you're having a conflict with someone or a problem, sometimes it can be a values conflict and issue. If you see things one way because of your value system and they have a completely different value system or set than you do, that could be part of what's going on and why there's conflict and a problem. And you may need to talk about that a little bit more and just say, look, we believe different things about this. How can we come together and maybe compromise and find a happy medium despite the fact that we see things in a little bit of a different way? Could you try to see things my way a little bit more and vice versa? Values are a really big piece to this. And then finally, personality type. And we just happen to list some of these things here. When you think about your personality type, this also rolls into your soft skills as well. Like, how does that influence who you are as a leader? Are you more introverted and extroverted? And if you're managing, for example, if you're really extroverted and you're managing some introverts, how do you need to better manage those people knowing that they need processing time? You can't just throw something at them and expect them to make a decision or get it all in one fell swoop. With your introverts, you may need to follow up with them in a couple of days, give them some thinking time. So lots of different things that you want to think about as it relates to your personality type as well, and how it influences the culture of your team, how you lead, but also how you manage these other people who may have a different style and type. Before we get to our last slide, which is our Q&A slide, so we'll start to dive into that in just a second, as part of understanding your unique leadership style and strengths, these are some of the top 10 leadership skills that the Development Dimensions International, I feel like I'm stumbling on my words today. They're a very highly regarded management consulting firm. These are the top 10 strengths or skills that they feel are important for leaders today. You can rate yourself on the scale of 1 to 10 here. Print this out, get a copy of the slides. We'll put that on the next screen here again. But print this out and rank yourself and see where you think you stand and what are some areas of strength and where are some areas where you may need to work on and improve a little bit more, or find people to help you and kind of fill in those gaps a little bit. It would be even better, I think, if you have that type of relationship with your team, if you could get them to rank you on these different ones so that you can get that objective opinion and it's not just a self-assessment. We like that idea a whole lot as well. So let's go ahead. I've done enough talking, I think, a lot. And we'd love for you to take a moment here to write down one action step that you would take in the next week based on whatever would be best for you in your situation, where you think that learning edge is for you. And it could be you need to fill out the leadership wheel. It could be, remember, we talked about redesigning or designing your relationships a little bit better. Maybe you need to sit down with one of your coworkers or employees, whatever is appropriate, and say, we need to have a tough conversation and just dig into some stuff. Can we agree to be respectful during this conversation, try to be productive about coming up with possible solutions. We can each give each other, a little bit of time to vent for a second as needed, but get right to being solution oriented. The slides and the strategy session email is at the bottom here. And I guess kind of one of the last things I wanted to say, kind of related to these team agreements or conversation agreements, is before we start with any of our coaching clients, we have them review and sign literally an agreement to let them know what they should expect from the coaching and what the role is that we will play in their relationship. And one of the things we tell them at the beginning, and we ask them permission for this, is to say, look, I might interrupt you sometimes during the course of our conversations. And I might tell you things or ask you things that may be a little bit tough to hear, but that's part of my job. Okay. So I'm not saying that as a manager, you need to be that intense about it, because obviously a coach relationship is different than what we're talking about today. But you can use some of those ideas to say, can we agree to these certain things at least to try to manage that conflict or handle difficult situations a little bit better, and have those things put out there up front. That will help. All right, so let's go ahead and look at questions that we have. And Yabi, make sure I don't miss any too. I think I'm doing okay here. There was one so far.
Yeah, we got one. So basically, what it sounds like is how to coach, or maybe even is there a different strategy on coaching younger, like college students and soon to be professionals?
This is a really good one. We get this a lot, understandably, because I think that we could do a lot better job in, different workplace settings to help younger people with this. They come out of school and it's like, they don't, it's hard to know how to behave professionally. So I'm not sure I would say that any of these would be different for younger professionals necessarily. What I would say is that the use of the good, powerful questions could help a lot, because I feel like with this younger generation, it kind of goes along with what we said earlier. Like, they may not know what's going on, and we may need to understand what their perspective is a little bit more, and they also want a little bit more engagement with their work. So I would leverage the powerful questions a lot, but also let them know too, up front, that I'm going to ask you some questions, but I also want to get your permission up front. Like, I care about your professional development, and I would like to, as your manager, to be able to give you constructive, positive, productive feedback along the way about how to handle certain situations. And I'm doing it from a place of caring about your development. Is that okay with you? I would do that asking permission thing up front with them. And you may need to remind them of that kind of along the way. But after you've gotten their permission, obviously give them the feedback in a positive, constructive way, but find out too from them how they would prefer to receive that feedback. For example, would they prefer that you talk about it in your one-on-one meetings that you have, regularly? Ask them, would you rather give it to you on the spot? Would you prefer it via email so you can read it and sit with it, or in person? So asking them how you can provide that feedback and what might be best for them to be able to process it and be open to it, all of that, I think that would be a really good idea too. And after that, it's okay to be direct and just remind them that, look, as your manager, when we have your performance review, I don't want there to be any surprises. The goal here is that we have had open lines of communication along the way, that you basically know, for the most part, exactly what I'm going to say. And I know as a manager that that's going to help you with your professional development in the long run. If you couch it like that, I think it's going to help. Hopefully that helped answer, because I know sometimes there's a lot of things. The other thing I would just say too, that just came to mind as well before we get to any other questions and close for today, is you want to pick your battles a little bit. It's kind of like with my 15-year-old. I tend to be hard on him, and I want to push him to be his best and all of that. And sometimes I have to remind him, or remind myself, I should say, to say, okay, look, let me work on one or two things with him in the next few weeks. So don't like beat them down too much either, and say, hey, could we work on these two things together? I can give you feedback and whatever, but is this something that you could take on? And let's work on it for the next month and see how it goes. If you also position it as a partnership a little bit more, although you are still going to hold them accountable, I think that will help too.